straight up solar in business development and also in our sustainability reporting. And so I'm here tonight to facilitate the discussion. The ISSP, the International Society of Sustainability Professionals, is a chapter that we have here locally, and I share with Kyle Crawford from the Federal Reserve Bank. And Kyle really has been instrumental in coordinating the effort to be part of the 1STL Sustainability Lab. So if you stick around, you'll learn a lot more about what 1STL Sustainability Lab does, a remarkable group pulling together all the sustainability initiatives in the region and in a way that hopefully can help move us forward together as a region. But I'm really excited for this afternoon that Morgan Neal is going to be with us and talk to us what she's been doing in the Netherlands, actually. And Morgan, I'll let you explain your background and sort of how you got there and who you are, and sort of introduce yourself. And before we do that, to me it's always helpful when I'm presenting to get an idea of who's in the room.
Yeah.
And so if each of us could introduce ourselves quickly and just give Morgan an idea of how we're here. That'd be great. Lacey, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lacey Cagle. I'm the director of learning at Northwest Earth Institute, and I'm on the planning committee for the Sustainability Lab.
I'm Taylor March. I'm the director of policy at TrailNet, which is a bicycle and walking advocacy organization.
I'm Casey Walsh. I'm a senior art director at an advertising agency, and we're doing a big sustainability push, so I'm here to just learn and soak it up and see what I think I have to do.
Good, we'll talk a little bit about great marketing.
I'm the only guy.
Yeah.
I'm marketing people. I'm also from an advertising agency, Gallery on Marketing Communications. I serve as creative director there, and I am Morgan's.
I'm Oscar Burmos, and I'm the reason Morgan is in the Netherlands.
I went there for love.
We'll see how that
I dragged him all the way here.
I'm Kathy Olson from St. Louis Earth Day, and I'm just here to soak up some information.
Michael Wolsetter, Associate Way Operational Planner, and have been involved with a variety of different space planning efforts in the area.
Nice. Great. Okay. Well, I think Morgan knows this, but she's also being recorded so that we can live stream for excellence.
Yes.
Far and wide.
Sure.
And I didn't know you were back there.
It's not good.
Yeah.
My name is Aaron Young, and I'm with East West Gateway Council of Governments, and I'm the project lead on the overall 1STL initiative. I'm also looking for opportunities to market regional sustainability, so if you guys want to talk to me later about that.
We got two of them.
Yeah. It's mutual marketing, getting the word out about our regional initiative and putting more word out to the general public about what individual businesses are doing.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Morgan, take it away.
Great, I'll go ahead and get started. How much time do we have? Do I have to talk?
15 minutes.
Great. Oh, I won't talk that long. Okay, we'll have some time for discussion. Okay, so my name is Morgan Guile. I am originally from St. Louis, but I have been living in the Netherlands for the last, for the last 5 years, in Germany a bit, and then in the Netherlands for the last 3 years, and I'm currently working as a sustainability consultant. So we work a lot with business sustainability plans. And I was in town, and I thought it would be great to come and talk about a little bit what we do. I've heard a lot of great stuff that's going on the ground here in St. Louis. Thought it might be nice to share some ideas from my perspective and where I work in the Netherlands. So I'll be talking about the motivations and examples from the European energy efficiency transition and kind of what they're going on. This is actually a picture from the Netherlands. It's from an island in the north called Texel. It's a really beautiful place. They have a lot of, it seems like they have a lot of nature there, but in the Netherlands, they created all their own land, so everything's perfectly planned. It's really nice. All right, so I'm going to be covering 3 different things in this talk. Number 1, what is pushing the energy transition? A lot of it does kind of come back to policy. That's kind of where people are grounding a lot of their motivation from, and I'll kind of go over what those big ones are. Where is the value in transitioning? Where do businesses see the real value in adhering to some of these policies that are being put forth? And then finally, how are businesses transitioning? They've been convinced that they want to do it. How are they then going to have a sustainable strategy for their business? And I'll be using 3 case studies, actual ones that I've worked on with my firm that I work with now, to give those as examples of how real businesses are looking at their sustainability strategies. So just a teeny bit about me. So I am from St. Louis. I did my bachelor's in conservation biology in Kentucky, and it was 5 summers of studying salamanders. So I did a lot of field work, a lot of ecology, and I wanted to kind of get more into energy and kind of the business side of things. So I moved to Germany and I got a graduate degree in renewable energies, both engineering and management. I kind of put those together and see those perspectives. And then now I'm currently working in the Netherlands as a sustainability consultant, where I get to help businesses. I did have a small stint at IKEA when I was writing my thesis. I didn't write my thesis for them, but the IKEA in Utrecht, in the Netherlands, I actually led a project to bring a sustainable cargo bike transport option to the store so that customers can rent it and take their purchases home carbon neutral. So that was kind of a fun accomplishment. So just to start with it, what is pushing the energy transition in Europe? So there's actually lots of levels of policy going on, both at the global level with the Paris Climate Accord. Most of you are aware. This is when almost all the countries, except for us, agreed to keep it to the 2-degree mark for global warming, and ideally below the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark. And the great thing is that countries have the freedom to determine their own strategies for doing this. And while we are the only country to reject the agreement, there are plenty of cities in the United States which are taking the on initiative, trying to meet the targets. It's really inspiring, actually, what we see. In Europe, in order to help meet these targets, the EU itself, which is comprised of 28 countries, I believe, I'm not sure about that, they decided that they wanted to put some targets up so the countries knew what they were working for to try and meet these targets. So they put out that they want to have a 20% energy efficiency improvement by 2020 and 30% by 2030. So this is kind of driving that international Europe continent as a collective. And then in order to meet these goals, each individual country has put out their own kind of legislation for this. And in the Netherlands, where I'm living now, they have the Wet Milieubeheer, which is basically just environmental conservation laws. And it's basically just countrywide policy for conducting environmental impact studies and planning at both like municipal and provincial levels, issuing environmental permits, and protecting environmental quality. So you have these 3 different levels going on. Wait, I went the wrong way. So in order to break it down a little bit further for this energy efficiency directive or the EED, this is really big in Europe. And it really pertains to large businesses. So most businesses that are more than 250 employees, more than 50 million in revenues, or greater than 45 million assets, substantially large companies. And they are then required to do an energy audit, create a schematic of all of their existing flows, and most important, identify what's most important to their energy consumption. So they're getting it all laid out. They're saying, this is our energy use, these are our flows, this is where we're getting the most energy, or using the most energy. And then they need to identify the energy savings potential for the coming 4 years and the cost-effective ways that they can implement energy savings measures. So this is required by any company that's bigger than this. In addition, to also, the Netherlands has taken more of a view on this of the amount of energy you use, not necessarily the amount of how big your company is. So they have their definition for companies that use a lot of energy. And basically, the main part of this, there's a lot of stuff in it, but basically, companies are being they're required to take energy saving measures with a payback time of less than 5 years. So it's not that big of a deal. You're not really having companies pay a bunch of money and get nothing out of it. They're paying for energy efficiency improvements, and then it's getting paid back within 5 years. So these are reasonable investments that are being kind of pushed and required by the government. Okay, so when companies are looking at their strategies, there are quite a few different things they look at. These are probably familiar to you. A lot of companies use them, the science-based targets, which are a way to help you set targets according to what scientists are saying about global warming or climate change, and how to set your targets in order to keep the level of emissions reductions in line with the 2 degrees target. There's also the greenhouse gas protocol, which helps define what kinds of emissions you are identifying from your business. So you have scope 1 emissions, which are the direct emissions coming out of your factory or plant. There's scope 2, which are the emissions that happen as a result of the activities of your business, and scope 3, which are kind of the more indirect ones that are kind of further out there. And there's specific ways to define this. Specifically looking at carbon neutrality, there's the PAS 2060, And this is the internationally accepted standard for climate neutrality. PAS is just a publicly accepted standard, and they have it all written out if you're looking for guidance on carbon neutrality. Then there's also the ISO 14064. There are a ton of international standards for various parts of sustainable strategy, measuring various things. This is the one that is the internationally accepted method for CO2 calculations. So all of this is just a bit of an example. There's a lot out there, and you'll see some more standards kind of come more into my talk. The point to remember here is there are a ton of standards out there. There are a lot of people working to develop programs to help companies measure, see where they're going, set targets, and identify how they want to develop their strategies. And a lot of companies in Europe are taking advantage of this. So now that there's kind of a pathway to do it and some motivation, where's the real value? Where are the businesses seeing the value in transition? So there's a variety of stakeholders in any system. You have governments, customers, our consumers, entrepreneurs, industrial people, industrial manufacturers, industrial organizations. So there's different value for each one of them. So for instance, meeting the political targets, the government finds a lot of value in that, and they will put money towards that, meeting their targets. As a business, your increased efficiency leads to direct energy cost savings. If you're using less energy, you're spending less on your energy. So that's a direct benefit. You're using resources more efficiently. Europe has a lot of people in that continent, and they're not necessarily resource poor, but they just have a lot of people and a lot less land to put those people on. So Europe as a continent, as the EU, they are very happy with more efficient use of resources, and a lot of their policy or investment in science is really for the prosperity of the EU, using their resources more efficiently, getting more value out of less. Anytime for cities or municipalities or people in general, reduce emissions, reduce waste, reduce pollution, this leads to better human health, especially for systems that have socialized healthcare. If you have a healthier population, you're paying out a lot less on your healthcare costs. It's really beneficial for everybody. Consumers, I'm not really sure about the United States, but in Europe are increasingly demanding responsible products. So businesses that are looking at where their products are sourced, are their employees treated appropriately, are the materials sourced from in safe conditions. Companies are needing to be more and more transparent about their supply chains because it brings value for their customers. You can attract green investors, particularly in real estate. If you have a green building, LEED is big. BREEAM, B-R-E-E-A-M, is kind of the Dutch version of LEED. Making green buildings according to those standards, as well as having carbon neutral business operations, these attract green investors in those real estate properties, and it can really enhance a green portfolio, especially with a lot of the impact investing platforms that are increasing these days. Those investments can be a lot of value. And finally, it's good for a future prosperous society. We're working towards sustainability, treating societies better, treating the environment better. It's kind of the natural happy byproduct of it all. Okay, so now you have the pathways to do it, the policy, and you have the value in it. How exactly are businesses taking the initiative and including this into their sustainable strategies? This is a huge list. You don't have to read it. But the point is there are many ways that you can assess the way that you look at how you want to do a sustainable strategy for your business. The first one is a life cycle assessment. I'll go into that. It's a bit like a carbon footprint. Well, it is a carbon footprint calculation, but it goes deeper in that it takes your whole supply chain into account. Eco-efficiency analysis is looking at your technology investments optimized with decreased environmental impact. It's a really great way to kind of find the most effective investment opportunities. Natural capital accounting or social, human, and financial capital. This is monetizing natural resources, your employees, your financial capital, and society as a whole, because these can all be given a value that then help you in risk assessment management later on. And then kind of down here, you have a bunch of standards that help you do this, that explain the principles and framework of doing a life cycle assessment, that tell you how to calculate the environmental footprint of your product, or giving a review to certify EPD. I know EPDs might be on here because it's a requirement for LEED, but they're pretty big also in Europe. It's a lot of what we do, especially at my company where I work. And there are a lot of products in these calculations. So it's not only just figuring out the numbers for your company, but also you get your EPDs, which are required by regulation sometimes. You can get an eco-label for your product. You can enhance your product with green marketing. You can have actual numbers behind your product and help with marketing a more sustainable product. or you can even create yourself as like a carbon neutral, have a carbon neutral transition. So the case studies that I'll be taking come from the life cycle assessment, natural capital accounting, and carbon neutral transition. So these will be the three that I'll go over now. First off will be a case study with life cycle assessment screening. The word screening is up there just to mean it's more of a, it's like a life cycle assessment light. Normally when you do a life cycle assessment, it needs to be reviewed and certified, follow all the standards in order to be able to be publicly published. A lot of times companies will opt for a screening, which is more of a big picture overview. You follow the same methods, but you don't get so detailed into the models, and I'll explain that. So what a life cycle assessment does is it essentially calculates an environmental footprint for your product or your organization, depending on what you're looking at. It's going to look at a wide range of environmental and social factors. So any of these that are here, deforestation, resource depletion, global warming's in there, but also different toxicities and smog formation. All of these things contribute to your environmental impact. And basically, they call it like it's a form of environmental bookkeeping because you're essentially taking the pluses and minuses, the impacts and the benefits to the environment, and you're putting them all together. You're looking at the very beginning of the product creation, so the raw material extraction, all the way to the end, when it's either landfilled or incinerated or recycled back into the system. So there is no chance for double counting. You're not double counting any of the positives or negatives, and there's no way to hide your impacts. A lot of times, sometimes companies will narrow their scope just to be their operations. They're like, oh, we're really low. But then like when it goes to the use phase, the way that people use it really causes a lot of emissions, things like that, and they'll not count them. But life cycle assessment tries to avoid that, really get the full picture for a product throughout its entire lifetime. The way that these things are calculated is using environmental impact categories, which I believe are, they'll be on the next page. I will explain that on the next page. This is what basically what a happy model of a life cycle assessment looks like. You're basically taking all of the environmental burden from each one of these life stages. You're breaking the product down into the materials that were extracted, the processing of the raw materials, the production of the product at the plant, and any associated energy use or emissions, the use of the product, and the end of life, what happens to it after it's used. And these can then be fully, like I said, fully reviewed according to the ISO standards or just a simple screening. It depends on how detailed you want to get, how much you want to spend, how what's important for your organization. Okay, so I mentioned that a lot of those impacts are measured using the environmental impact categories. These are, they include a lot, but they're not limited to carbon and water footprints, ecosystem quality, so things like biodiversity, your natural resource depletion, and human health. So things like toxicities and other kinds of pollutants going into the air. And all of these are calculated in that model to give you an idea of which ones exist and how much they are. But the end result is also calculated in global warming potential, which is basically kilograms of carbon equivalent. So basically all of these emissions, whether it's gas or toxicity, is equated to what that impact would be had it been released as carbon. So for instance, methane can be more destructive than carbon. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long. But they basically said if you release 1 kilogram of methane into the atmosphere, it's the same as releasing 25 kilograms of CO2. So that would be the CO2 equivalent. And 1 kilogram of nitrous oxide is almost 300 kilograms of CO2. So it's like some of these, they're not as common, nitrous oxides are not as common, but when they are released, they can be much more destructive in the perspective of global warming or climate change or environmental impact. So getting into a bit of the case study that we did, we worked with a Dutch hot water tank company. They just make hot water tanks for houses. And they had the impression that their tank was the most sustainable on the market, and they wanted some numbers to prove it. So we took their product, which is a stainless steel tank with a flexible kind of insulation. That's their product. We compared it with another stainless steel tank that's on the market that has a rigid, kind of less easy to remove insulation. And that was then also compared to the steel tanks, which tend to be cheaper, but they have this enameling, this glass that is stuck on the inside of the tank, making it really difficult to recycle because you can't separate those materials. And so they were saying, yeah, we want to compare it to these because these are the most common ones on the market. We think ours is the most sustainable. So that's what we did. We took a one tank, 200 liters, and we took all of the energy use, all of the raw materials, all of the fuel and water consumption, all the pollution throughout each one of those life stages, And those will kind of go in as the burdens, as the environmental burdens. And to do this, we use a bunch of databases that are developed by other countries or companies, and we use software to kind of put them all together into a model. So all of those burdens are being taken from very science-based, sophisticated databases that carry these burdens, as it's called, and they are kind of added together with the credits or the positives of having a product that has a high recycling potential. So it's a good thing if that stainless steel can be reused, and it's kind of like a positive. Or if it has a nice end-of-life treatment that the whole thing can be recycled, or it's not just incinerated but reused in a different way, or even if it has a circular waste stream, meaning that the entire product can be totally reprocessed and reused for the start of the new life cycle. So all of these are put together in the model using a computer, and it spits out a really clear end result, where you have the client's tank, which shows a global warming potential lower than the other stainless steel tank, and even much more lower than the steel tank. So you're able to clearly see right away, given all the assumptions that we gave, and you always keep it very transparent what assumptions were made, what can get you this result. So this was nice to see. We were happy to see this. We were able to kind of corroborate what the company thought. As a third party, it's our responsibility to make sure we approach it from a very scientific perspective, not giving any benefit of the doubt or trying to skew numbers in a way that favors the company, but really keeping it neutral. So we were happy when we saw this. We had good news. The great thing about a life cycle assessment is it can be broken down to show you a lot more information. So this is the client's tank broken down in the different life cycle stages. So you can see the raw materials, manufacturing stage, distribution stage, the use stage, and the end of life. And the great thing about this is you can really see where the impacts are coming from. So they were a tank manufacturer, meaning that they accounted for these kinds of emissions, as well as distribution, getting their tanks out of that. The big impact comes from the raw material extraction. You're getting iron ore, steel out of the earth. So that's a big, kind of a big deal. It's pretty destructive. So it's natural that the raw material stage tends to have the largest impacts. Also from this, you can see that the end of life, they have a pretty big credit. Because the majority of the tank is able to be recycled, and a certain percentage of that stainless steel then goes back into making more products for stainless steel, basically the raw pellets that they use for products, they have a really nice credit at the end. So when you add them all together, they end up having an impact that's 244 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, which you'll notice is lower than the initial impact. The raw material extraction is 277, but because of this credit, they're able to kind of have less overall. And that's what's nice about life cycle assessment. You see the overall, but you also see the individual parts. This is a screen with a lot of information. The only important part is these are all of the environmental impact categories. They're all calculated separately. You can look at them separately if that's important for your business. If you're near people, near a water stream, and your toxicity, ecotoxicity is important, you can look at it. It's there. So I just kind of wanted to show that you can see this. Also, there tend to be trends where each one of these is also broken up into the individual life stages, and these big bars in the beginning indicate that usually this raw material extraction has the highest impact. You can kind of see where it is. In addition, you can make pretty even comparisons across the board. This again shows each life stage broken up and compared with the other two tanks on the market that they were hoping to compare to. And it's interesting when you see this kind of thing, because I'm not sure if you can see it, but the credit for the client's tank is negative 78, but the credit for the other stainless steel tank is negative 92, which is a bigger credit. Technically, that tank is easier to recycle at the end for whatever reason, whether it was the type of insulation or the type of plastic they used. But because the extraction of those materials costs more, in the end, the client's tank still turns out better. So this is a really great way. You can really break it down. You can see the life stages, and you can really get a lot of information out of it, which is why they in fact use this method. So how the company ended up using the results. So they were able to see where the impact in the value chain was highest for making efficiency improvements. Now this was a screening, so it was very broad and kind of, they just used kind of the main things. And from what we saw in their manufacturing chart, didn't have that much of an impact compared to raw material extraction. But maybe then they could go look for a supplier that tries to be more sustainable, does more remediation, and they can help bring that down. Secondly, they can enhance their green marketing strategies. So again, they couldn't publish this information, but they know enough to know, hey, this gives an initial indication that our product is more sustainable, the materials that we use. So we can use this in our marketing strategies in future. And maybe we then do LCA specifically focused on that. And then you can actually publish that information and show the world your findings. Finally, it gave them a great starting point. They considered sustainability strategy for their company. They were like, okay, we just want to get started. Let's do a basic overview and let's see where we stand, because you can't really start anywhere unless you have those numbers. Yeah.
How, when you're doing a comparison to products from other companies, how willing are they to share the information with you, or is it?
Yeah, it depends.
Common?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, if they got a really good result, maybe they'd be open to it. Technically, all of the studies can be compared because they're all measured in that kilograms of carbon equivalent, but you do also have to look at the assumptions that were made. So a lot of times they'll kind of go back and forth and say, well, we made this assumption and you guys made this assumption. But for the most part, it really depends on the company. If it's a chemical company, especially when it comes to like divulging the kinds of materials that they have in their formulas, not a chance. So getting an EPD from one of them is ridiculous because you really have to have a third party to get that information and then to share it. But for the most part, as long as you have a good one, you'll want to share it. I have talked to bigger companies. A lot of ones, motivation for them not wanting to do it is because they say when they want to start doing it, and everybody's nitpicking and they're like, well, why did you do it this way? And why didn't you account for this and all this? So sometimes it's just avoiding the PR storm that comes with it, even though they are doing something, trying to do something good. So there's really a lot of kind of factors that come in from different sides as to whether they were sharing or not. So overall, LCA is a great way to get started. You can put impacts into numbers. You can start visualizing how you stand. You look at the entire value chain. You're taking in all the externalities, nothing is hidden. And finally, you can identify your major hotspots, see maybe where you want to invest more time, more energy, or more knowledge. Okay, I'm going to switch gears, and we'll move kind of into a different kind of measurement, which is natural capital accounting. And this is a case study that we did with a pulp mill in Brazil. And natural capital accounting looks more at the environmental resources, and it's more of a tool for resource management, or risk management, sorry. So the background of this case study is a large chemical producer. They provide chemicals for a pulp mill, but this pulp mill is located in the middle of Brazil, very remote. So they wanted to invest in an on-site chemical production facility next to the pulp mill. But this is a risk as you're putting millions of euros into a building, and you really want that pulp mill to stay viable. You want to make sure that they're not going to go out of business, otherwise then your investment is kind of worthless just sitting there. So the chemical producer wanted to perform a natural capital accounting study on the activities of the pulp mill to see how they were affecting and impacting the natural resources around them. Were they making sure that they were keeping their business viable? So then they could assess kind of the long-term risk of investing with them. So to do this, you look at your natural capital. Now, what is natural capital? You want to think about ecosystems, water, wetlands, forests, water bodies, and the associated ecosystem services that come with them. Forests regulate the hydrological cycle, and the roots prevent landslides, and wetlands absorb storm surges for flooding. It's also the raw materials, all the water, the minerals, the timber, the things that are usually sold on the market, and they're given a price for that. What natural capital assessment does is it takes these factors and it divides them up into impacts and dependencies. What does the business depend on, and how does the business impact these kinds of resources? They're broken down into different cost benefits, and they're monetized in order to put them in a value that everybody understands, which is money. And then these values can be directly input into a profit and loss sheet for a business to actually look at the risk of impacting these resources or using them. So for a company, the impacts of natural capital, it'll be the emissions that you're releasing into the atmosphere, how you're changing the land, where you're putting the waste that's coming out of your business, what you're discharging to the soil, whether you have a disturbing operation with lots of lights or noise, which could affect the biodiversity around your factory if you have one, the way you extract water, and the way that you put it back into the water. These are all ways that a business can impact natural capital. A way in which a business depends on natural capital is by getting all of our energy sourced from natural sources. We rely on pollination, especially in agricultural sectors, to have food. All of the materials that you use for products come from the environment. Erosion and soil regulation, you don't want your factory crushed by a landslide. They're very happy for those trees on the hill. Anytime you want to get out, you rely on it for recreation, wetlands for storm and flood protection, and obviously the water. So these regulated hydrological cycles, we can count on water to be there when we need it. So for this system, the scope of the study was to look at the pulp mill and how the chemical facility interacted with it, as well as how the pulp mill interacted with its fiber production. And all of these were assessed on their impacts and dependencies to nature. I'll just mention here that there is also a protocol for this. As I mentioned, there's a lot of standards. The Natural Capital Coalition came up with a Natural Capital Protocol, and actually this project that we did was a pilot to run through this protocol to actually run for the first time to make sure that it was a viable system. And it was very good. We ended up getting some nice results. So the first step is to first identify what are all the dependencies of the businesses that the business has. You don't really have to look at this, but basically you have the pulp mill and the chemical facility. It depends on fresh water. It depends on their fiber crop, which is determined by soil quality, biodiversity, and land use, as well as the energy that goes into the pulp mill. So these are the main dependencies. The main ways that the pulp mill will impact the natural capital around them will, again, here we have the pulp mill and the chemical facility, the light and noise pollution that affects the biodiversity, the air pollution. There's a wide variety of things that could be released into the air that affect climate change, acid rain, how they're managing their forestry. Makes a huge difference when it comes to soil cycles, nutrient cycles, again, biodiversity, changes to microclimate, as well as what you're taking from the water and what you're polluting to the water. Again, a wide variety of things that could lead to eutrophication, bioaccumulation. It can get complicated pretty quickly. So in order to do a study like this, you have to narrow your scope. And for this project, we decided to focus mostly on water uptake and water effluent because a pulp mill uses a lot of water. Also, it's in Brazil, which some areas are kind of having a history or some problems with drought. So we thought this was an important one to look into given the location. Also looking at the air emissions, it's a pulp mill, it has some emissions, as well as productivity. There have been reports in the area of microclimate kind of being changed. Not really sure why, but certain areas were not getting rain, other areas were getting rain. It was affecting fiber crop production. This is also a factor of risk management, so we decided to include it in the study. So, in order to do this, in order to do a monetization, essentially what you're doing is you're multiplying, in the case of water, the amount of water that comes into your plant, and normally you multiply that by however much you pay per meter squared, and that's how much you pay for the water. And that's what you're paying now on your profit and loss. What this monetization intends to do is to give the water the actual true price of what that water should be. Now, this is not money that you then should be paying to somebody or that somebody will be collecting, but rather, we are going through a time of climate change. If you are extracting water from a river, maybe in the future there's less rain, maybe there's a lot of factories located on that river, and there is a risk that in the future there will be no water there and you then have to import your water. This is what it's going to cost. So these kinds of things, this is how you need to think about the monetization. They're shadow prices, they're future projections, they're not actual money that you're paying to somebody. They're rather what to think about in your risk management strategy. So in order to do this, you take the real reported data from annual or sustainability reports or personal interviews. If you're working with a company, they'll be very open to giving you their data. If you're not, you have to use publicly available sources. If you're missing some data, there are plenty of databases that can give you estimations. And that's what these are here. And all you're doing is very simple. You multiply it by the projected price of what that should be. And those prices are calculated by real scientists. This is an institute in Sweden, and they do environmental priority strategies. Basically, they have a whole list of natural resources and the average cost of what that money kind of should be. So that's a resource. Sometimes companies have developed tools to help calculate this thing. So Ecolab came out with a water risk monetizer that takes where a location is based on the environmental factors and the projected, if you can predict climate change of the area, how many people exist in that area that are also depending on that resource. And they've created a tool, particularly with water, that helps give you a coefficient that then you can multiply the price you're paying for water now by that to get the true cost of your water. Finally, you can turn to other books and academic articles or previous case studies to see what other prices have been determined. And then you get your actual cost, which again is the shadow price cost of the resource. So when you're just looking at what the chemical facility and the pulp mill pay for water, they pay 0.12 cents per meter cubed for their water now. And you multiply that by 40 million or whatever meters cubed that the pulp mill uses, and this 400,000 that the chemical facility uses. And this is what they're actually paying now for water. The pulp mill is paying $500,000 for water each year. The chemical facility, way less, 5,000. It's like non-existent. What they should be paying, in order to find that. So this is their actual cost of what they should be paying. When we implement those prices from those other projections, from those other sources, the Swedish Institute didn't really have a projection for it. They were like, water zero in the world. So you got to find a lot of sources. The water risk monetizer gave us a price right around 34 million. And the a previous case study done with a lighting company had a price around, I think it was like €4 per meter cubed. And so that gives you right around 185 million a year for that same amount of water. So we look at all this, and like good scientists, we try and find the one that fits best. We're like, okay, well, this one really took the location into account, the type of industry, and so we think this is the best representation. Many times if you're getting big prices, it's because they're located next to cities. And as soon as you get cities involved, you have health costs on top of that because pollution is affecting the populace. All of a sudden, that extra cost comes from all of the people getting sick. So we chose this as the what the proper cost should be for water for this pulp mill. We also did this with air emissions. We basically calculated the different nitrous oxides and sulfide oxides and the carbon. And you'll notice the point of doing this was to see that there's not very much of the first two, but rather the majority of the emissions are in carbon. And this can become important if the price of carbon increases. A lot of countries have implemented cap and trade systems or putting a price on carbon. This was calculated with carbon at 10 euros per ton. And if that increases, then, so this is what it would be if they're paying for carbon at 10 euros a ton. And it's only going to go up then if you add more cost of each ton of carbon. So these are the final results. The thing to notice is the red is the what the actual projected cost should be based on the actual impact. And you have the current cost of what they're paying now, and these kind of lower ones in the blue. And you can see that they're far less. So what the company then does with these numbers is they'll look at these projected numbers for what the true costs of these different resources are. We have water consumption, emissions to air, productivity, emissions to water. And they will then compare that to their revenues. I didn't include that slide here because I wasn't sure about confidentiality. But then they will decide, okay, is this a risk? Is it not a risk? How do we deal with this? And so it's really great for dealing with your risk management strategies from the perspective of looking at natural capital. So the company used the results in order to see the full cost of impacts and dependencies on the natural resources, how these were being affected, putting it into a money value, which could be easily compared. And they can make a decision. Hey, do we want to invest in this chemical facility or do we not? That was a direct decision that they were making based on this result. And you can sometimes identify relatively unseen factors to put into your risk management strategies. So for instance, if the price of carbon or water goes up, this might hurt the pulp mill's ability to stay viable. But if the price of carbon is going up, suddenly there's a market for carbon storage. And a forest is a great way to store carbon, if you look at it that way. So, you can kind of think about alternative business models with that. AkzoNobel is a really big chemical company. I don't know if you guys know it. Apparently everybody in Europe knows it. I didn't know it. They did a really great study where they actually developed methodology for looking at natural capital, as well as financial, human, and social capital. So this is societies, employees, and financial capital and where the money is going. And I won't talk about it here, but they did a whole study where they brought a book through its entire life cycle, and they calculated the monetization for each one of these factors. It's publicly available online, and I really encourage you to look it up. The AkzoNobel 4D P&L is what it's called up here, and they just did a really great breakdown of monetizing these different things. Just wanted to mention it. So take-home message. You're taking the price of natural resources beyond just their market worth. It's not just what that wood is worth on the market, it's worth what the destruction is by cutting down that forest and not having water regulation anymore as well. It's also great for risk analysis. You have a more inclusive overview of factors and dependencies for your risk management strategies. So finally, the more brief case study that I think more people can relate to is a carbon neutral transition for small businesses. I think we have some, I didn't know if we have small businesses here, but I promised to talk about something applicable to particularly small businesses and carbon neutrality. Going back to the European Efficiency Directive, it really only applies to big companies. So there's really not much for small companies or what are SMEs, these small to medium enterprises. Many times if you're a big business, you tend to have more resources, you have more time, you have more knowledge, you have the ability to pay for these science-based targets consultants, and you can meet the climate neutrality standards, and you have sustainability and CSR departments. They're at your disposal. This is not the case with small businesses. Many times there's a lack of time, lack of money, lack of knowledge. You don't really know if your customers want it. You know, if you're a small mom and pop shop, you're like, wow, I know people like our stuff. I don't really know if they want it to be more green. And there's a lack of affordable recognition or clear marketing. So even if you do something, how do you tell people about it without spending a bunch of money on it? So actually, my company, EcoMatters, is rolling out a system that focuses on these small businesses to help them in their carbon neutral transitions. And essentially, you're breaking it down into 5 different stages, and this is a typical way to do this, where you calculate an initial footprint and you set a target, and these are based on your CO2 emissions, your energy sources, and the energy that you're using. And then you create a roadmap, and then you take action and you can check and certify. And the idea behind this is that we are actually aggregating a lot of stakeholders over in the Netherlands, different government organizations or industry associations that have an interest in this stuff. And so they're willing to kind of foot the bill. And then we help them with an energy audit and creating a plan to help with investment and installation. So it's really providing that help for the small businesses to get them on board. And usually these other stakeholders are happy because they have mutual interest in this happening. So what you can do is actually there's a gold, silver, bronze kind of structure. We're piloting this now, so it's not like super rolled out, but basically gold is your fastest transition, basically become carbon neutral now. Silver, maybe it takes you a couple years to get there, and the bronze would be that, no, maybe you're going to transition in 50 to 20 years, something like that. And those aren't fine. But basically, you set up a specific plan that tells you exact things that you need to do and action to take in order to make your business carbon neutral. A lot of times you think that you can't, because maybe you're not a production facility, you're not a factory, you don't have big distribution networks. Every business can do something. You know, initially changing out your LED lighting or upping the insulation in your building, installing a heat pump, getting your green energy, or switching over to more sustainable transport. Some of these are more difficult than others, depends on what kind of business you are. The point of this is it helps create a plan. The best part about sitting down with people who know what they're kind of doing is they can help you create a plan that helps implement these changes when they make sense. So for instance, I'm not going to go out tomorrow and buy a heat pump. It's ridiculous, they're very expensive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of look at my timeline. I'm going to say, oh, okay, my boiler is 25 years old anyway, 30 years, and I had a major maintenance necessary now, or it's time to change it out. I'm going to plan here for the point when I get a boiler or a heat pump, because it makes sense. It was a natural point of maintenance anyway. Same thing goes with switching over to green energy. Maybe you have an energy contract that you're locked in for 3 years, however that works. And you're like, okay, well, I can't do anything now, but hey, in 4 years, that's when I can switch over. That's when I'm going to make plans to do it. And the point is here you can just see it laid out, it's structured, and it gives you achievable targets that you can follow. This is kind of a visual that shows in order for the world to meet the Paris Accord targets, we need to reduce our emissions to carbon neutral by 2050. So as your business, this is what you're emitting now. In each year or each couple of years, you're taking steps to reduce your impact. And you choose a target based on the initial energy scan and the energy calculations that are made in the beginning. You choose how quickly you want to transition, and then you get certified based on that, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze, depending on how fast you go. And then you can have this clear step down to carbon neutrality. You can be happy or well below the Paris target. And every year there's a little bit of a certification to show that you are still silver certified carbon neutral. People can see that, and that can bring value to your store. So this is a real project going on now. We're developing the methodologies for it still. We have the entire calculation tools and are rolling out. And we're really excited to be able to bring this to small businesses, which normally don't have the knowledge or the know-how or the interest to even consider this, which is nice. So creating these carbon neutral transition schemes, you get the long-term investment map to make investments, and looking at the full timeline to fit the specific business's needs. Everybody's different. You can't have a cookie cutter model for everybody. And you need to have the aggregation of the right stakeholders in order to pay for that time to look at that. And also it's a way to kind of incentivize and certify a scheduled and steady transition. It seems straightforward, it seems like a no-brainer, but having a schedule like this really, really helps to be able to see it. If there's anything I want you to take home from this talk, we just talked about 3 different case studies. It was a lot of information, maybe a bit technical. The thing I want you to take home, measurement is a fantastic way to get started. I know it's the business I'm in, but doing a life cycle assessment, looking at natural capital, calculating your energy, or doing an energy audit, you can't do anything until you know the numbers. You can't have a look at a system at all until you know where you stand and how you compare to others and how you compare to the targets that you're trying to reach. In addition to that, there are tons of options for measuring. There are a ton of standards, a ton of protocols, ton of companies. The methods are all comparable, they're standardized, they're verified. Companies are using them. Honestly, they're simple enough to do yourself. And there are experts that can help you get started. We talk all the time, we're sustainability consultants. It's no secret that a lot of big companies are just hiring in their own sustainability people. It's not rocket science, but having an expert there to kind of help you get started, to show you what's up, how to read things, understand the protocols, really get that help. It's there if you want it. Incorporating sustainability, it really doesn't have to be costly or no benefit for your business. It's not just a charity to save the trees. It really is about smart investment, long-term planning, and increasing your material energy efficiency, which is really good for anybody in the long run. And the natural byproduct, I mentioned it before, you're working towards a more healthy, responsible, and viable future by focusing on your sustainability. So that's what I came here to say today. So I would kind of be interesting to hear thoughts. I think we have some time. I don't know. Because this was the European perspective. This is what I work with on a normal basis. And I hope it was interesting for you all. I would love to hear your reaction or your impression or your ideas. This inspired any thought, or if you see, maybe you guys are already doing this and you're like, we already know this, we already do it. I don't know if there's any feedback.
We have a, I don't know if she's still here, but the lady out here, Jean Conti, she runs a Green Business Challenge in the St. Louis region. So she does like elements of that, and it's all on self-reporting. So it's not a cohesive program, and there's not inputs and an output for you to measure how you're doing. So we have a foundation here in St. Louis to roll something like this out and we can put something together. But
They're looking at figuring out measurements right now because the measurements are not very robust currently. Part of it is that it's geared toward being really flexible depending on the business. And so then you don't really have standards that can like apply to everyone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
And I know one of the shortfalls in the Green Business Challenge is they didn't have a way to measure your product, so it's just about your operation.
Yeah,
You have efficiency efficient lighting, and fine recycled paper, but if you're making something, that's not part of the Green Business Challenge. So.
That kind of touched on your question before, though. Like, are people willing to share it? Like, sometimes if you're a coal miner, that's what it takes.
If the company with the most efficient water heater is doing the measurement, and they're looking at a product that is not as efficient, do they got to call them and say, hey, how are you doing this? That other companies are being compared to, are they willing to share relevant data
Oh, I see.
to make that comparison?
Yeah. That would be. I would be interested to see that. I don't even know if that happens. Yeah,
So
that
that's
would be
based
curious.
on assumptions.
Yeah, the other thing I can see it getting kind of tangled is if that is your marketing strategy to be the most sustainable producer of that product, then probably not. You're probably not going to be sharing how you did that. Which is kind of counterproductive. But yeah, I like to think the goodness of humanity will eventually push that.
I know that with ecological footprints, there is an assumption that there are lots of equivalencies and assumptions that are made, and they're never completely accurate. It was really interesting to see the comparison of the actual cost and how different they were. So can you speak a little bit more to that and like, is it ever challenging to figure out what's the best,
Yeah.
most applicable cost?
Yeah, it can be because sometimes the data isn't always there. So there's not 5 papers that were done on the Amazon in Brazil talking about water. So it is an assumption game. And we will try and find rural studies that did a river in a rural tropical area. So it's like trying to relate it as most to the area as possible. And in the end, we actually, using a tool like the Water Risk Monetizer, which really itself took in a bunch of data about the location and the other businesses that are around there and the industry that's there. But yeah, sometimes it's kind of difficult. And the only thing that you can do with that then is you say, this is everything we looked at and this is why we made the decisions we made. And that's a lot of times what it comes down to. And then these things will kind of filter out and you'll find the better ways to do it with time. And it's all about being transparent and just saying, this was our best guess based on all this information that we found. So, yeah.
I always find it interesting too that it seems like the first place people start or companies start to is looking at energy efficiency. And don't you think it's because it's where the payback is the quickest? So even this reporting mechanism you talked about last, it's a great place to start. And then if you can capture that savings and apply it to that long-term plan you were talking about.
Yeah.
I always find that really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a great place to start. I mean, it's the easiest thing you can do is that low-hanging fruit. And especially if you're not a producer or manufacturer, it's really all you can do, besides getting all your employees to back to work or something, So it's really important to look at it in that sense. Yeah.
Well, as it compares to like waste and water and health and all of the other pieces of the sustainability pie, is what I was always.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also if you're kind of in a lot, that's the thing about kind of with the life cycle assessment is you almost have to have a big enough operation that you are in charge of your own waste streams. So if you're a company in the city, you're connected to city waste, and then you're completely dependent on whatever the city's doing, and you have no influence over changing that.
Right.
Besides maybe putting a brick in your toilet to make it less water flow or something.
Right.
So I mean a lot of that is sometimes it's just a matter of aggregating those stakeholders together, and that's actually what the carbon neutral transition scheme tried to do, was to bring in, if you're a retail person, you can't do any changes to your building. You have to talk to your landlord, somebody who owns that building, because most likely you're renting that space. But if you can talk to these people and get them together early and working towards the same goals and finding value for each of them, then they're more willing to work with you on these kinds of things. And it becomes easier to install better insulation in your building, or to put together a better septic tank wherever you happen to be or something like that. And it's a work in progress. You have to tie all those stakeholders together, and that's almost the biggest challenge of it.
That what you guys spend a lot of time doing.
Yeah, and not me specifically. We have a great business developer that's on that, and he has a lot of connections. But really talking to all the different industry organizations, the owners of the stores, the owners of the buildings, government, what they're looking for. Really important to have conversations with them. And we feel like it's kind of a novel approach to really do this. Maybe not in our little area of the world. It was, we thought it was a good way to start. And we're rolling out those pilots now. It's actually, we've been getting some fun, interesting results already, just talking to people, seeing where they find value. I mean, it's kind of, yeah.
Do you think your company, EcoManage, is making efforts to move some of these processes into the United States? It seems like it could be a big market, because I think we're looking at a curve. But added to that, I don't know if there's as strong a motivation or interest here, and there should be, as it is in the United States. And I think if we see some success in Europe, maybe that will incentivize them.
Yeah, it definitely can. The tough part is, especially in the Midwest, water and energy is as cheap as it gets. So it's not really a big concern for people. I know I've mentioned it before that if we roll out our pilots and they're successful and there are companies that are interested, we would 100% be interested in rolling out pilots in St. Louis. That's a legitimate thing. But we also don't want to just come in here and be like, oh, this is how we do it, because there are very different kinds of policies here. There's different ways of working. There's different ways of thinking. There's entire cultures that think differently. So there's a lot of barriers there kind of in the way of just kind of setting up shop here and saying, okay, who wants to go carbon neutral? But I have heard that the LEED initiatives are very big here, and it could be relatively, I would be curious to see how much further you'd have to go beyond the LEED requirements in order to see who would be interested in going carbon neutral. Because as long as you're paying attention to your energy use and consumption, you're looking at your buildings, it's not so much further to start looking at your operations as well. And again, many times we do leave the products kind of out of it for the time being, but if you can get your business operating carbon neutral and your building, it's a great start.
Well,
From my personal experience in St. Louis, I mean, you kind of mentioned it in your presentation with the small and medium-sized businesses. It just seems like so many businesses are kind of in this mindset, like, we're barely making ends meet currently. We can't think about our impact right now. The only like organizations that I felt like I've worked with that have really been able to take that broader perspective and even consider life cycle cost assessing is like large universities and things like that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of that is as you said, like the social impacts being factored in by European countries when it comes to healthcare and things like that, and the capitalist kind of system being so cutthroat that like the margins are so slim to begin.
Yeah, right?
It's just
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if that plays a factor as well. Yeah. So you mostly work with what kinds of businesses then?
So I actually went to school for environmental engineering, and then I worked in energy efficiency, and I worked in solar, and now I work in transportation. But I worked with like WashU and SLU, and
Oh, I see.
those are the only organizations that I felt like were like kind of had the brain space and the manpower to really take on some of those larger questions of like, what is our impact with this specific decision? Whereas like the individual businesses that I always felt like I was a part of, we were kind of like doing what we could do to survive that day.
Yeah. Then you really can't think about it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Planning, it's a no-brainer. You definitely want to look at it, but you do have to sometimes make those investments early up front, making it really difficult. Yeah. I don't know if I was very answered.
Well, if you look at the United States landscape, I mean, there are state policies that really differentiate one state from another. So
Yeah.
I'm just sitting right in the middle of two states that have very different energy policies. At different times, you can see how that's making an impact. But I wouldn't say that it's made its way to businesses yet, like they're saying, you know, so governments and municipalities and nonprofits are taking the plunge, but there aren't as many businesses, you know, that
Sure.
have said that. I mean, the big ones, certainly,
Yeah.
you know, and we're seeing a lot of that, but small ones, not
Yeah.
so much yet.
And sometimes it's definitely just not being able to visualize those non-direct impacts. So
That's
it's, you know, I mean, that's kind of the thing with global climate change, right? Because everybody's like, but it's not really changing my life. It's like, well, it's what we do now affects what we do later. So we do need to pay attention now, and that's always tough. Sorry?
I just don't realize it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you know like when companies start to become responsible for their own waste streams, and that is a kind of a natural point where this kind of takes. Is that something that's more common from your experience in Europe than it is in the United States?
Well, the companies that we specifically work with mostly tend to be chemical producers or manufacturing companies, or we've done some work for the government as well, but those are usually larger scale things. So maybe just naturally the kind of work or industries we're in has led us to companies that do that. We are starting though with the smaller companies. So I'd be interested to see if that really, I can't say if it's more common or just because we worked more with them. That was just kind of the perspective that we kind of take on it. I mean, I guess it would be the same here, I would think. If you have a producer or a manufacturer, even if they're small though, like the tank company, they were small. I mean, they had like 50 people, but they would produce all the tanks and they were in control of their waste streams because they had a factory in the middle of nowhere. So that was one there, but yeah, I wouldn't really know if it was more.
I just asked because I mean, like, one of the things that I've done that's kind of been surprising and eye-opening to me was to assure this Express Scripts, which is like one of our Fortune 500 companies.
Okay.
And they were touting as their sustainability efforts, you know, like they're now taking things out of smaller bottles and putting them in bigger bottles, and recycling the bottles, and before they just threw them away.
Okay.
And that's just like flabbergasting to me. But like you've got like one of the largest drug buyers in the United States, and they're still getting pill-sized bottles that are this big, and so they're unpackaging them, and now they're recycling it, and before they weren't.
Yeah.
And it's just heart and soul crushing.
Well, they had that. The term I hadn't heard before I moved over there, but I also wasn't in energy, was greenwashing. I don't know if
Yes.
that's a thing. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff you see, which is okay. I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm like, great, you took a little step. You're starting to think about it. I mean, you're not going to see people taking over the big stuff. But I am kind of excited to see with the Bayer acquisition of Monsanto, that's a German company, and they're big and they're huge. And I'm curious to see what these kinds of European headquarters do to the American landscape, because they are going to potentially also be focused on the sustainability concepts. And I'm curious to see what they bring them to the United States. But I'm not sure, because we don't have the same political landscape, of course.
I don't know if it was because they were bought out, but Anheuser-Busch, they've got incredible plans.
Yeah, we think that,
on
yeah.
the landscape for what they're going to be doing over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
That did seem to happen after they got bought out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're like a multinational corporation, you have a more global perspective. There are also, it's not as much here in St. Louis, but there are also a lot of B corporations in the United States that are thinking more about these things. I was thinking particularly, I just was talking to my former executive director who is a consultant with B Corps now, and there is a brew doctor, which does like a Townsend's kombucha and all that stuff. They're based in Portland, and so they're actually having to pay to put the alcohol waste, whatever products they're creating, to put it down into the drain. So that's causing them to try to be innovative about, like, they can make other alcohol products, but anytime you make more alcohol, you're also getting rid of a lot of alcohol and having to dispose of it. So it kind of depends on where you are, what the requirements are for the municipality, and also people who are self-selecting as wanting to be benefit corporations in the first place. But,
Sure.
So St. Louis isn't the only
Yeah.
example of the United States, thankfully.
Yeah. But that paying for waste streams, that comes up a lot in life cycle assessment as well, because many times companies will run that, and maybe a certain kind of material is super expensive to recycle, so they'll end up paying for something more expensive in the beginning, because in the end, it really just works out to be better. Like, that's really good for seeing that. Kind of those cost structures help motivate that. Yeah.
Did anybody ask any questions about ecosystem services? I'm wondering, is there any international standards for applying values to watersheds? As an example, in their water cleaning abilities, or you really got to do the study at a local basis to have those numbers?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues in doing a natural capital event is getting local numbers. That's the biggest complaint. I was at the Natural Capital Conference. They had it in Edinburgh this last year. And that was like every single little breakout session was like, oh, but how do we get better data? And it was like, oh, well, you have to do a study there. And suddenly your little natural capital project would be immensely expensive to go send someone to Brazil and to look at the water and really look at it closely. So for now, they are just using the scientific studies. That's the best they can do, is using these, whether it's the databases or the actual scientific studies that they're relying on, of these similarly located studies that were done on biodiversity or vegetation counts or water availability for the most part.
We're just, as a region, I don't know, but we're not now having more discussions about applying values to system services, and people are trying to find grants to do it.
Yeah.
So as a regional initiative, I'm wondering if it's something to pursue to create a central database for values of ecosystem services that people can pull from a central database and apply to local or a business.
People would pay for it. I mean, we pay for all of our databases that we use in Europe because it's a big thing. It could potentially be something that would be of value, that if you put in, and you have like PwC and TrueCost and some of these big companies that's what they do, is they put together these databases and then they sell them. So it could honestly be one, and I actually thought natural capital would be a great one applying to the United States, given all of our natural resources and how we work so hard to protect them. But I would be curious to see, because our populations also aren't as dense and maybe not having as big of an impact on them. I'd be really curious to see.
There's certain issues like the floodplains.
Yeah.
There's things we could probably focus on.
Yeah, for sure.
Get some regional common numbers.
That actually would be really interesting. I mean, at least from a scientific standpoint, I think that would be really great. I mean, especially coastal cities, right? I mean, to really see the value of how protecting that kind of stuff, to put it in a number. I mean, even just doing a natural capital study for down there and actually paying for the commission to actually do it, I'm really curious if that would even, the city would want to pay for that. Even if it wasn't a full database, but rather just a specific study. Or in the Midwest, as you're saying originally.
We have lots of coastline.
Yeah, that's true.
Two-sided.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm curious, but what else, yeah, that would be interesting to do. I mean, I know that's what everybody was saying, was lack of data. I think it would definitely be worthwhile, you would have to just find the right outlets, I guess, to find those customers and see what they're really demanding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was thinking of it perspectively using local universities to do the research for it. But
Yeah.
if there's a business opportunity, I mean, that's why we're here in this building. Because,
Yeah.
you know, we're supposed to interact with the entrepreneurs here.
Right.
There's somebody that can do it and make money on it.
Yeah,
So let's
databases,
see if that can
yeah.
be done.
Yeah, I mean, the data applications are ever increasing these days, right? And having that available. I mean, actually, Ashwin, and he's a data scientist, so he's actually in the data all the time, so maybe he could, you don't have to say anything. But he knows what it's like to work with data every day, so that's something becoming more and more valuable. I think it's definitely not an idea to throw out, from my perspective. Maybe other people are different.
Thank you so much. It's been
Absolutely.
really helpful to put
Yeah.
it all together, so yeah, good job. What kind of years should you have?
Oh, wait, hold on.